So we are in the middle of our DNA series where we're talking about who we are, what we're about, and we're using all S words. So the first week we talked about the Holy Spirit as a tool that Jesus has given us to be effective. The Spirit leads us, He guides us, He shapes us and forms us into the people that He wants us to be. He empowers us with boldness to do the whole thing. So the Spirit's a really important tool. Then we talked about the tool called the story of God. This incredible story that gives us context for who we are, who God is, what our place is in the world. And that story has themes that shape us and form us. Then we talked about servanthood and how powerful it is when we engage with the world, using our lives to build other people up, to raise other people up. That's the way that we can love. Jesus said, "They'll know you are my disciples by your love." And so servanthood is this real tangible way that we can love other people. And today, we're talking about Symphony. What does it look like for the church to be a group of people that are together, but not the same? So Acts 17, you just heard it. We're going to kind of dive right into that. Here's kind of what's going on. Paul, Silas, and Timothy are missionaries, which means they're people who have been sent around the world to proclaim the good news about Jesus and his kingdom. And they're in a place that's now modern-day Greece. I've got a picture up here for you. If you see kind of in the middle, kind of right, you'll see Philippi. That's where Paul and Silas were before this, and they travel at the beginning of the text down through Amphipolis and Apollonia, and then over to the red dot, which is Thessalonica. This is a big port city. It's the biggest city around there. It's still to this day the second biggest city in Greece. And they go to Thessalonica because it's kind of a strategic place. Like I said, it's an important city. It's a port city. So if you get believers there, it'll kind of spread throughout the rest of the region. Well, Thessalonica is kind of an interesting city because it is a free city as opposed to a Roman colony. And the way this happened was that when the Romans were coming through and kind of taking over everybody, the people in Thessalonica willingly submitted and supported the Roman government, the emperor. And so they were honored as a free city as opposed to a conquered Roman colony, which gave them a few advantages, like they had elected officials, they had their own government, they had their own currency, and they were really free. But that also meant that they had to be faithful to the Roman Empire, and so they took that very seriously. We have some evidence that there is something there called the imperial cult, which I know sounds like something out of Star Wars, but it's a real thing in the ancient world. These people believed that the Roman government was the savior of the world, that the nation of Rome, the empire of Rome, was the thing that had come to save everything, to bring about peace, to bring about stability, to bring about economic flourishing, and they believed that the emperors were gods. And there's lots of evidence that the people of Thessalonica believe that. And the only reason I tell you that is because it's important for what happens in this story. Paul and Silas arrive in the city, and they go to the synagogue, and Paul opens up his Bible, and he begins to tell them that Jesus is the Messiah based on the fact that he suffered and died. And the reason he has to open their minds, that's the word that's used here, the reason he has to open their minds is because that was not typically how the Jews thought about the Messiah. The Messiah was this righteous, victorious, reigning king, and so to think that he had to suffer and then rise again just didn't make a lot of sense. But he proved it to them by opening up the scriptures. At least he proved it to some of them, because it says some of them believed, but there were a group of people that didn't. And that group of people stirred up, they incited a riot. So what they did was they went to the marketplace and they found, my translation said ruffians, and that's a pretty good translation. And basically it's kind of riffraff, people that are just hanging around, troublemakers. They go and they essentially hire these people to be a part of a riot. And they go and they attack this guy named Jason's house. Anybody know there was a guy named Jason in the Bible? Well, there is. They attack Jason's house, and Paul and Silas are not there. They were going to drag Paul and Silas before the city authorities, but since they're not there, they decide to take Jason. And so they do. They drag Jason before the city authorities. And here is the accusation that they throw on him. These people who have been turning the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has entertained them as guests. They are all acting contrary to the decrees of the emperor, saying that there is another king named Jesus. Another king named Jesus. It's quite the accusation, right? These guys are turning the world upside down. What world are they talking about? Well, they're talking about the Roman Empire. I brought another picture for you. If you'll look up here, you'll see all the colors except for blue. That's water because it's a map. All the colors are places that are ruled by the Romans. And you might think, well, that's not that significant of a portion of land. It is, first of all. That's a big portion of the world. But if you look up there to the north where Germany is, and then like the Eastern Europe and Russia and all that stuff, those are natural borders. So the Rhine River flows down to form that one border, and then the Danube flows across the top there. So those are real natural borders of the empire. To the west here, you have what's called an ocean. That's the Atlantic Ocean, and so there's no more land to conquer that way. To the south, this is Africa, and so you have the Sahara Desert, the Libyan Desert, and so you don't want to go there. And then to the east here, you have the Euphrates River and the Arabian Desert forming a border there. And so by all intents and purposes, the Romans ruled the world, at least the world that everyone that lived in this area knew about, right? So what they're saying is these are the people who are turning the entire world upside down with their message. What was happening was they were going from city to city. They were talking about this good news. And groups of people were popping up. These groups of people that had a common mission that they were on together. Everyone was contributing to this common mission, and it was causing chaos in the empire. And that's where the symphony image comes in. That's where I want to start talking about symphony. So whatever your feelings are about classical music, surely you can appreciate the concept behind it, which is that a group of people all playing different instruments that sound different come together to produce a sound that's much more beautiful, much more expansive than anything they could play as individuals, right? So that's the concept. And we think that's good imagery for helping us understand the function of Jesus' church, because like a symphony, the church needs at least three things. The church needs at least three things. The first thing that it needs is a group of people. Have you ever seen a symphony, like you bought tickets to go to see a symphony play, and you get there and there's just a dude up there with a clarinet, and you're like, what's he doing? Like, I came to see a symphony. I came to see a group of people. The word symphony actually comes from the Greek word symphonos. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but it's from the prefix, which means together, and phono, which means sound. So symphony means together sound. The whole concept of a symphony is that you have multiple instruments coming together to form one dynamic sound. So you have to have a group of people. The church has to have groups of people. The church is a group of people. So when God designed the world and its systems, when he designed us as humans, he wove into the fabric of his creation an interdependence on one another. Relationships are at the center of God's created order. Relationships are at the center of God's created order. In other words, you can't play the symphony alone. It was not written for a single instrument. You cannot play the symphony alone. It was not written for a single instrument. If you read the New Testament, what you'll see is these letters that are being sent to churches. And it has instructions about how they're supposed to function as the church. And very rarely is it organizational or institutional in nature. Very rarely is it, actually I would maybe even say never, is it instructions on how to upkeep the building they're meeting in, right? how to conduct the services when they gather. There's a little bit of that. But do you know what most of it is about? How to preserve the relationships within the church. Most of it is about how to preserve those relationships. So Paul will say things like, when you're led by the Spirit, there's fruit like love and patience and peace and kindness and generosity and gentleness, right? These things that are all affecting other people. These are relational things. But he says when you're not being led by the Spirit, there's some relational difficulties like rage, envy, jealousy, bitterness, backbiting, quarreling, right? All of these things, they're relational. And so what Paul understood, I think, is that relationships are absolutely central to the effectiveness of the church. The same way that they're absolutely crucial to the effectiveness of a symphony. Okay, so I'd like to move on and talk about the agreement on the piece of music that they will play together. That's the second fundamental part of a symphony. You have to have a group of people, and they have to agree on what they're playing. The reason that that's important is because if you've ever been to a symphony, maybe there's 50 players on stage, and all 50 are playing a different piece of music, it sounds dreadful, right? I've never actually heard that sound. I tried to find a video of it so I could show you, but I think everybody's like, well, why would there be a video of that? Nobody wants to watch that. Nobody wants to see 50 different instrumentalists playing different parts. It would sound dreadful. No one would ever want to see it. No one would ever listen to it. We would all stop our ears so that we wouldn't have to listen to it anymore. It would be a disaster. The piece of music is the center. It's the consensus that brings the symphony together. Same people, same skill level, same combination of instruments, either way. But when there's no agreed upon center, it makes the whole thing fall apart. So the piece of music that we must agree on is the good news about Jesus and his kingdom. That is, so to speak, the music that we agree on. That there's another king named Jesus. That was the confession of the early church. In fact, there's some evidence that the Roman armies would go into cities, and in order to find the Christians during some of these major persecutions that happened, they would line people up and they would say, you have to say Caesar is Lord. And if you didn't say that, then you could be executed or you could be jailed or whatever. Well, the Christians wouldn't say it because their proclamation was Jesus is Lord. And that's a proclamation that could cost them their life. It could cost them their socioeconomic status. It could cost them everything. So it gives maybe some new power to Romans 10:9, which says, if you believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. Right? We're not just talking about a simple little confession. We're talking about this is what I'm staking my life on, that Jesus is the King, not Nero or Domitian or whoever the emperor happens to be at the time. That has to be the central claim of the church. That's a piece of music that we're all playing off of. And that's important for 3 reasons at least. I'm sure there's more, but I came up with 3. The first is because everyone in all the homes and neighborhoods in the surrounding cities needs to experience the good news about Jesus and his kingdom, not just hear it. And one person can't do that. 2 people can't do that. It takes a whole community of people to really be that presence in any given city or community. So that's one reason that it's important that everybody's on the same sheet of music. The second is that the reception of the message is dependent on whether or not there's agreement and unity. So in John 17, Jesus himself is praying for us. He's not praying for his disciples. He prays for them, but then he says, I'm praying for those who will later on believe. That's you, that's me. And he says, I pray that they would be one with each other the way that I am one with the Father. That's his prayer, that we would have unity. And he says this, so that the world will believe that you have sent me. So that the world will believe the message, the church must have unity. The implication of that, of course, is that disunity and fragmentation in Jesus' church causes people not to believe the message. Why? Well, I think Probably for the same reason that none of us would want to go watch an orchestra play, 50 different songs at the same time. It just doesn't sound good. Doesn't sound good. And third, no matter how beautiful the words of the symphony are, people will reject it. People are going to reject it no matter what. Jesus said that. In fact, Jesus said, "Blessed are you when people," where is that? When people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Blessed are you when that happens. There will be suffering and persecution that comes with living out this symphony together. That's why it's important that we do it together. So when you undergo that suffering and persecution, like the Thessalonian church did, we can say we're doing it together. We're not alone. We're not out here by ourselves. And then the third part of a successful symphony in church is the commitment by each individual to play their part well. So maybe you go to a symphony and you're noticing that something's off because there's like an oboe player that didn't practice enough, right? There's a violinist that forgot to tune. And so you're listening and you're thinking like this whole thing sounds off. Now there might be some, trained ear kind of people, they're sitting here. And so you would be able to pick it out. You'd be like, that oboe player, he's the problem. We need to get rid of that guy. Or I can't believe that violinist forgot to tune her instrument. But for the most part, the majority of us would just think, this just doesn't sound right. This just doesn't sound good. And so one rogue or undisciplined player can make the whole group sound bad. Now notice that that verse that I just read, Jesus doesn't say, "Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of false things about you because you are a jerk." He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, "Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil about you because you throw judgment on people wherever you go." No, it has to be on account of doing things in his name that he would agree with you doing, right? When you do that, that's when you're blessed and still undergo persecution. Now, this speaks to playing our parts well. Jesus goes on to say this a moment later in that same Sermon on the Mount. "You are a salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." So this is really important. And I want to make sure that this is clear and that everyone gets it as we talk about our mission of taking the kingdom of God into every home and every neighborhood and every surrounding city. What I want to be real sure that we communicate is that you can participate no matter what you're already doing. So, in other words, to join the symphony, you play the instrument that you already have in your hands. In order to join the symphony, you play the instrument you already have in your hands. For some of you, that's your home. And you invest in your children so they grow up to be followers of Jesus. And you walk to the fence and you talk to your neighbor and you love your neighbor and you're present in your city and you treat the people that you come into contact with in your city, you treat them well with grace and dignity. Some of you own a business. Well, play that instrument well by treating your employees with grace and dignity. See them as real people. Love them. And take care of their families. Go the extra mile with your customers. Show them that they can trust you. Some of you are artists and plumbers and coaches and bank tellers and landscapers. Play those instruments well. Play those instruments well so that the people you can come into contact with will experience the good news about Jesus and his kingdom. See, the church is most effective when it's spread, right? When it's scattered. When we're all playing our part in this big epic symphony that's happening. So there's that scattered element. There's also a gathered element that's really important because just scattering is no good, okay? You can't just scatter and say, "Oh, I don't need the gathering." The gathering is really important. The gathering is when we all come together and we find empowerment from each other, and we find that we're not doing this alone. We find encouragement. We challenge each other. We build each other up. We bear one another's needs, right? The gathering is really important. And it's only when the church is gathered that it can be scattered effectively. Okay? It can't be one or the other. It can't just be always gathering together and thinking about our own needs and never scattering. That's no good. And it can't just be scattered and never gathering. That's no good. We have to be gathered together and scattered about playing our instruments well. So the church, like a symphony, must be a group of people who all agree on the piece of music that we're playing, and all of us are playing our instrument well. And that's the beauty of the church, that we're not doing it alone. Rather, with a common center, we play diverse instruments together to create a sound that is unique, engaging, attractive, and provocative. And I think I've already mentioned, which some people will still find repulsive. Together, we create a sound that is much more beautiful and much more expansive than we could ever produce as individuals. And when we do that, it turns the world upside down. When we do that, it turns the world upside down. We're going to end a little differently today by watching a video of what it might look like for, it's like a metaphorical video, but what it might look like for us to really come together and be that symphony for the world, that people would kind of be drawn to it and wonder what's going on with that. It's different, it's unique. We're just going to watch that video and then we're going to close out.